Okay, we're going to get started. Some people are getting here a little bit late. I was just going to go through a couple of things. Last week last class, even though we're still going to be talking about radio today, broadcasting per se, there's new research out all the time, and I wanted to continue to share that with you. This is just some new research that I came upon yesterday. As I said, some of the statistics that I shared previously were a couple of years out of date, and a couple of years is a long time in what's happening right now on the internet. It almost seems like the big players on the internet, like Google and Facebook and Twitter, are changing things every day. You can write a book if you want to, but by the time the book is published, it's outdated if you're going to be very specific about what they're doing, because they're changing all the time. Anyway, this kind of Johnny come lately. I predicted that we're already at tipping point a couple of years ago, but this survey also suggests that we're there, in that they're asking people, in this case, what is the source of your favorite TV program? Your favorite video entertainment program, and it has now flipped in 2017, has now become an online source. So Netflix, Hulu, something like that is now outproducing, or has more favorite shows than network TV does. That by itself is what they're suggesting is a tipping point when you can say that. When you say, oh yeah, my favorite show is fill in the blank, and it's a Netflix show, the networks have problems. And that is what just happened this year, is it was getting close already. You see what's happened over the last few years. It's kind of, let me blow this up just a little bit more for you. Maybe too much, a little bit more. So basically they're asking where their favorite TV shows are. And so, in just a couple of years ago, it was 31% said online, Netflix, Hulu, whatever. Then in 2015, it was 38%. 2016, it went to 40%, and now it's jumped all the way to 52%. Netflix just announced last month that they're going to spend billions of dollars on original programming. Billions. It was their word. They didn't say exactly how much, but they put it in the plural. Billions. Because they know they have network TV on the run now. So now they're going to they have the money, they have the audience, they have the money to go after network full-fledged. So if your favorite shows are going to be on Netflix or Hulu or whatever other competitor there is, now, like I said, that tipping point has arrived. It's going to start tumbling the dominoes. In addition to that, Facebook announced they're going to spend $1 billion in original shows in 2018. In other words, Facebook is going to become a TV network. And so that's new. And they said this article says it's not just Facebook, that was in response to other social platforms suggesting the same thing. Apple is also earmarking a bunch of money to create new original programming in 2018. I guess it's just the two that mentioned. Anyway, so I was thinking it mentioned more than that, but Netflix and Amazon are spending billions. So basically, all the online providers, and now including some that have not been in original entertainment creation themselves, like Facebook, are getting into the business. YouTube is in the business now. Of course, you have Amazon, you have Netflix and Hulu and a bunch of others that are competing. So when you look at that statistic and they say now my favorite shows on online, now the networks are on the run. There's also other aspects of this. Again, as I've said before, the advertising follows the audience, and so as those shows go on, there's going to be also more competition to decide how to fund that. Some of them might decide to put in advertising the same as TV does, network TV does. So sell their advertising and not go just to pay for it all with subscription fees. But regardless, their video is, according to a survey of advertising executives, and we'll get more into this later when we talk about advertising specifically, 90 to 95% of the advertising executives, marketing executives say video is still the most powerful form, as I think Poe would say, is the most powerful form of advertising. And so it's one of the failings, I think I've mentioned before, one of the failings of newspapers is that they haven't adapted online to this. Newspapers, it does not cost that much to become a TV station online. It does not cost that much to go ahead and host video ads online. And so they're still thinking of their website more or less as a print medium. And that's one reason why they're failing, is that they're not taking full advantage of all the trends, all the online trends. And one of the most powerful online trends is video advertising. It is also, like I say, not that hard to create some video programming, especially for a newspaper who's already interviewing people. They already bring people in to be interviewed as part of their editorial board. That every few days they bring somebody in, and the executive editor and the managing editor and the publisher and the head editorial writer and some other people will sit down and interview this newsmaker before they decide how to what kind of opinion to write from their opinion page. And so that very process gives them an opportunity. They could video that. That could go online. And they're not doing that sort of stuff. They're not putting enough video on because that's what people want. So even though I poo-poo Poe a little bit about him saying that people don't like to read and write, I think that's too simplistic. But they do prefer video. That I have to admit, and that's what it seems like the print media doesn't understand, that they need more video if they're going to survive. And so this is the increase that they are predicting for just video advertising, retail advertising. 14.2% this year is what they're predicting. According to April 2017 Interactive Advertising Bureau study, 55% of U.S. retailers spend directly with premium video sites. So this is part of the trend. It's not just Netflix spending billions of dollars in new programming. It's also that advertising needs to go video, and newspapers are capable of doing that. I was the distance learning coordinator at this previous university, and we only spent $15,000 in setting up a TV studio. It is possible. Online video is so much cheaper than broadcast video. So if you're a newspaper, you almost have an advantage that you're not in the broadcast business. You can, for $15,000, set up your studio. Whereas the TV station is probably spending that every couple of months just on maintenance issues. And so, the difference between, what a newspaper could be doing and what they are doing is great. Meanwhile, ironically, even the TV stations are not doing much with their online websites. They could be doing more as well. They could be pumping up their video advertising more than they are, and they should also be developing some more original programming, better original programming. Right now, their news programming, local station news programming in America is one of their biggest money makers. One reason is that they don't have to pay the network anything for it. They don't have to run any network ads, anything. When they're doing their own programming, they have all the advertising time for themselves. It's when they turn on the switch for the network programming, now the network, the main way they're compensated is they get to put ads into their own programming. And so that means there's less advertising time for the local station. And this, of course, I'm speaking from an American perspective, but that's kind of how they work it, is that the affiliates don't have to pay a bunch of money up front because they're allowing the networks to put their own advertising in all their national programming. And so a good share of their programming is national, which cuts down the amount of time they can put local advertising in. So, and the other reason why they should be doing original programming and thinking outside the box, again, not just news, but thinking about other types of programming, is that I'm convinced that the networks are going to pull the plug on them. When the networks realize what's happening here, okay, so you have the situation where Netflix is going to spend billions of dollars. People's favorite program is on Netflix or Hulu, one of the competitors. It's no longer on on the networks anymore. At some point, the networks are going to say, you know what, we're better off just being a direct competitor with Netflix. Just have our own station, have people pay us directly, and maybe we can keep advertising so we can make ours cheaper, but put all of our programming on our website, all of it. Make all of our programming available on our website. So what's that do to the local station? That gives the local station, it undermines their audience immediately. So that's probably the first decision they're going to make, is we're going to put all of our programming available, make it all available, and we're going to make it free because we're going to put ads on it. We still have that power. We have the advertising sources. So we're going to beat Netflix by making all of our programming free and available online to everybody. And they will go after Netflix that way. That's my prediction, because that's their advantage. They already have the advertising clients in place, and if you have to, even though it's not much, you have to pay your $10 a month or so for Netflix, another $10 for Hulu, and up come all the U.S. networks to say everybody gets to see our stuff free, because we'll put some advertising in it. We're going to push our advertisers to make theirs interesting, kind of like Super Bowl ads, if you've watched any of those. But we are going to, that's our best bet in competing against the Netflix and Hulus of the world. We have to hit them head on. We can't be going through our affiliates anymore exclusively. They're on their own. So I think the locals they'd be better off if they already started some original programming, and they definitely should be promoting their video ads. They probably need to do more than that, but that's a beginning point. They're going to have the plug pulled on them by the networks. I'm absolutely sure of that, because of, like I say, the fact that their online challengers are now out competing them, and they have to figure out what to do about it. What are they going to do? And where you get so many people into this, Facebook is not going to get into original programming without an expectation to win. But that's their mentality, right? Facebook is going to win, is their mentality. And so they're going to spend that billions of dollars. They may only be $1 billion in 2018, but once they have success with that, they're going to start putting in more in. And it may be that Facebook also will be able to do it without advertising. And so that may be their advantage, is that they already have advertising on their page. And so if they insert it right into the timeline, and so as you're going through your timeline, there's their original programming. You go through it, here's another original programming that they're going to try to attract your readers to. They're surrounded by ads already. And so they may have some video ads embedded within, but they also have advertising on the whole platform. And so I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, I'm kind of guessing that Facebook will try to outcompete Netflix and Hulu by making theirs free. But we will see how that plays out. I think it's inevitable that somebody's going to say, we can offer a free alternative and beat them. Because people do care about that $10 or $20 they're spending on Netflix and Hulu. And we can come up with good programming and put some advertising in it and embed advertising around it, display advertising around it. We can make this work with advertising, which the American media have been doing since the early 1800s. And so that is the American way, is do it with advertising. And so it seems to me like the networks and Facebook both, and as YouTube is doing theirs with advertising. So all of them, of course, YouTube is kind of annoying sometimes. They're putting more video. They are using more video advertising. You've all seen that when you go on. Up will pop a video ad before you start seeing the content you want to see. But it's usually their strategy is, after about 5 seconds, you get to click away from it if you want to. So they tell their advertisers, you got 5 seconds to get their attention, and then we're going to let them click on to their programming. So do your advertising, be smart about your advertising. You might get them to stay with you. But though you've got 5 seconds, and then we're letting them go to their content. So that's a way of doing it, and YouTube seems to be doing pretty well with that approach. It's tolerable from my perspective. Anyway, so in America, again, that the number of people going on the internet to watch their programming. Excuse me. This is the multitasking. So a good share of America's audience is multitasking. This percentage of change, it doesn't mean it's getting less; it's getting more. But the number of people is dropping a little, or not the number, but the percentage of increase. So this is still increase. So even though the increase is going down 4.1, it's still increase. It's not decrease. So the amount of increase of people multitasking is coming down a little bit, but it's still increasing. And so over since 2015, you add up all those numbers, and it's actually more because it's a percentage of the previous number. But if you add that up, that's 14, about 20, 25, 20, like 28, 29% increase of people multitasking when you add all those increases together. Nearly it's increased by basically almost a third since 2015. A third of more people altogether are multitasking. That is, they're doing something on their mobile phone while they're watching TV. They're doing something on their tablet while they're social, interacting in their social media. At the same time, they're watching their TV show, whatever, that sort of stuff. Okay, so those are all brand new. That's all brand new from the last month. Changes that are happening in our broadcast media, or things that are happening to them, as the case might be. And again, all evidence that we've reached a tipping point, and they're going to be hurting bad, over the coming 10 years. Now they're about 10 years behind newspapers, is what I said 2 years ago, and you may see it, like any domino, any of these tipping points, it starts to fall and then it collapses. And so you can see some dramatic changes very, 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 very quickly, as you did with the advertising revenues. So, they dropped just a little bit in 2016, a little bit in 2017, and then it just collapsed. And now they've lost 2/3 of their advertising. And so with any of these tipping points, it's hard to say exactly, okay, when is the tipping point? So it has already started a little bit ahead of time, but the tipping point is when it starts to collapse. And so in that sense, you might really say that 2017 was the newspaper tipping point. That's when it really started collapsing. It was coming down, and they could feel it. They realized, it had been going, their advertising had been going up until 2005, and they thought it was going to keep at least steady, and then it dropped enough that they realized, it's here. And it took them by surprise that it just dropped a little bit, dropped, 10% that year or something. It said, oops, we didn't see it coming that fast. But then next year it dropped a lot more than that. And so it just started collapsing. So you might, where it was a serious collapse, where it suddenly was dramatic and appeared to be, definitely no fluke. was like 2000, maybe 2007, excuse me. So exactly 10 years ago was when you realized, okay, we saw signs of it last year and the previous year, and now this is for real. We've just hit the tipping point and it's collapsing. So, when exactly to call the tipping point is a matter of opinion. I said it started 2 years ago, because that's what some of these statistics started saying. Okay, it may be a little more like a snowball, like I said, than like an avalanche. And so I'm seeing it something starting to come down, and it hasn't picked up a lot of power yet. But it's coming down in 2015, 2016, and now we're seeing it pick up more momentum and more snow or whatever coming down that mountain, and now we're about to see something really dramatic. When it first starts coming down from the top of the mountain, you kind of, there's something happening here, and so that's like 2015 for TV and 2005 for newspapers. But it takes then a couple of years where it's coming down and picking up that power. You're saying, this is an avalanche. This isn't a snowball. This is an avalanche. And that's where we're getting close, I think, to where we would call it the avalanche in this tipping point. Okay, well, let's go ahead and have team 11. Team 11 come up and present on radio. See, where's theirs? Okay. Well, we can do it with that way. So the sound is on already, and take it away. Speak right into the phone, or they won't hear it.
Good morning, everyone. Today we will introduce Understanding Media and Culture, Chapter 7, Radio. I'm Dean, and this is my partner, Zheng Weida. Let's come to the first part. Evolution of radio broadcasting. First, what is radio? Radio is communication through the use of radio waves. There's two types. First type is radio used for person-to-person communication, such as phone call. And the second part is radio used for mass communication, such as television and broadcast. Now I will talk about history of radio. In 1832, electrical telegraph came out, and they used the electrical telegraph to send code message. The code message, Morse code is one of the code types. And in 1876, telephone and telephone switch came out. It's a transmission of voice over wires, but these two types both rely on wires. While during 1886 to 1888, wireless telegraphy came out, and it is invented by Heinrich Hertz, and he developed a method for short-range wireless transmission of signal. In the 1890s, wireless transmission over distance. Guillaume Marconi, he is often credited as the inventor of radio. As a young man, he lived in Italy, and he read a biography of Heinrich Hertz. I talked just now, and he saw the potential for the technology and approached the Italian government for support, but the government showed no interest in his experiment. So he moved to England and got a patent on his device for wireless transmission. While he is often credited as the inventor, but actually he combined the idea and experiments of other people to make them into a useful communication tool. In 1902, signal bounce came out. It's a method to increase distance of transmission by bouncing signal of ionosphere. As you can see, the signal tower sends the signal to ionosphere and bounces to our houses. In 1904, commercial service transmit news to ship. A commercial service was set up to transmit nightly newscasts to subscribing ocean-going ships, and the passenger ships could include the news in their onboard newspapers. In 1906, Reginald Fessenden, he's an American inventor, and he invented the first transmission of human voice. This is the alternator transmitter used for audio transmissions. In 1907, transatlantic radio telegraph service is invented. In 1916, experimental radio station appeared, and 2XG is the first radio station employing a vacuum tube transmitter to make new and entertainment broadcasts on a regular schedule. Leader Forrest is an inventor, and he self-described he is the father of radio. But as we know, the inventor of radio is marketing. But he is the first used the arc transmitter to conduct some of the earliest experimental entertainment radio broadcasts. Let's come to the next part, radio's commercial potential. In 1917, in order to keep amateur radio operators from interfering with mandatory use of radio waves for the duration of the war, the government banned the radio. But in the 1919, when the World War I ended, the radio ban left. And during the war, because of the military needs, the technology of radio has developed a lot. So some stations began operating using technology that had developed during the war, and they began to use radio to push messages such as religious sermons and sports and news. In 1922, WGA station began to play the live radio dramas. Okay, now I talked about advertisement. In the early, radio used for business, and there is no ads. But early radio ads they play as advertisements only during the business or called daytime hours. In the 1930s, in the Great Depression, because of the big economy pressure, the investors foresee the commercial potential of the radio, so the advertising and the radio station ads became a normal part of the radio. No longer after radio broadcast debut, large business saw its potential, profitability, and formed network. In 1926, RCA start the National Broadcasting Network and established both the Red and the Blue Network. In 1928, Columbia Broadcasting Systems has appeared, and in 1934, Metro Broadcasting Network came out. But what does the network radio play? In the early network programming, they focus on mainly on music, and also there are some dramas and comedies, news and educational program, and other type of talk programs are also rose to prominence during the 1930s. Compared to traditional radio, there are some significance of radio networks. The first one is many radio stations in many different cities share common ownership and programming. The second one is few voice in broadcasting reduce the diversity and pluralism. The third is networks are commercial, reinforce the ideas of radio as a commercial medium. The fourth, networks intend the influence of a few broadcasters in forming ever large groups. In the mid-1920s, profit-seeking companies own a majority of the nation's broadcast radio station. Non-profit groups operate another third of the stations. As the number of radio stations outgrew the available frequencies, interference became problematic, and the government stepped into the fray. So the Federal Radio Commission founded. And what the FRC do? First, he regulates frequency, and second, reallocate the station bandwidth to correct interference problem. And third, as it reserved high power channel majority for the network affiliates, and some small radio stations, they should to share the low powered bandwidth. And that caused the major network get a great profit, while the non-profit broadcasting fell to only 2% of the market. Okay, let's come to the most important part, the golden age of radio. The so-called golden age of radio occurred between 1930 and the mid-1950s. It's during the Great Depression. In this period, radio became free and so provide an inexpensive source of entertainment that replaced other more costly pastimes, such as going to movies. Turning into a favorite program at a certain time became a part of listeners' daily routine, because it effectively forced them to plan their lives around the dial. And in this period, daytime radio find its market. In 1934, Metro Broadcasting Network began to compete with MBS, and the Blue Network and the CBS Network. And as the network became more adept at generating profit, their broadcast selections began to take on a format that later evolved into modern television program. Daytime series, dramas, and programmings, which is focused on domestic work, aired during the day when many women were at home, became known as soap opera. Let's come to this part, the origins of prime time. The radio prime time is during the evening. 用中国话讲就是黄金时间。And from the 1930s, many families listened to radio together during the evening. They usually listen to the program, comedies, variety shows. And many primetime radio broadcasts featured film stars recreating famous films over the air. In the late 1930s, the popularity of radio news broadcast had surpassed that of newspapers. Because of radio draw its audience in close to events made for news that evoked strong response and lost greater interest than print news could. Also, the recording technology advanced is another reason. By 1945, radio news had become efficient and pervasive. Okay, let's come to the birth of Federal Communications Commission. The Communication Act of 1934 created the FFC, and as here a new era of government regulation. The organization quickly began enacting influential radio decisions. In 1938, it limits broadcast station to 50,000 watts of broadcasting power, and in 1940, he assigned a portion of FM spectrum for public education stations. In 1943, anti-monopoly decision required sale of NBC Blue, which is NBC is National Broadcasting Company, and ABC is American Broadcasting Company. In 1949, fairness doctrine requires equal time to address the controversial issues. Next, in the 1940s, television sets come on the market, and in the 1951, more Americans were watching television during prime time. So in the mid 1950s, some famous radio programs were made into television shows, further diminishing radio's unique offering, so the radio lost some of his audience. So from then on, radio programs became to focus on news and music. Because of the television became more and more popular, radio network abandoned the dramas and the variety shows that had previously sustained their format. They began to focus on music. One of the most notable and far-reaching of innovation was the Top 14 station, a concept that supposedly came from watching jukebox the patron continually play the same songs. In the late 1950s, Top 14 format became vehicle for marketing music. As music came to rule the airwaves, FM radios draw in new listeners because of its high quality sounds capability. We all like high quality music, but not that music with noise, right? And after the golden age of radio came into an end, many listeners turned into radio stations to hear music. But there is also some divergent radio, such as this one, public radio. It's a kind of radio that gets funds from government and some foundations. Public radio's first program is this one, All Things Considered. It's an evening news program focused on analyze and interpretive reporting rather than cutting edge coverage. That means that it seldom report the latest news, but to focus on analyzing some valuable news. About the conglomerates. During the early 1990s, many radio stations suffered the effect of an economic recession. Some stations began to share their facilities and resources amid this economic decline. Empowered by the Telecommunication Act of 1996, media conglomerate has subsumed unprecedented numbers of radio stations by single companies. Radio station consolidation brings predictability and profit at the expense of unique programming. Okay, let's come to the next part, radio station format. In this part, I will introduce this popular radio format: country, news, talk, information, adult, contemporary, pop, contemporary, hit radio, classic rock, urban, contemporary, and Mexican regional, and other some popular formats. The first one is country. Country music as a format includes stations devoted both to older and newer country musics. If you have listened to a song named Love Story, it's sang by Taylor Swift. It's one of the country music. The second format is news, talk, information. The news, talk, information format includes AM talk radio and personality talk radio. This format reached nearly 59 million listeners in 2010, appealing particularly to those aged 65 and older. Over 70% of its listeners had attended college. These listeners also ranked the highest among formats in levels of home ownership. And the adult contemporary. It usually play the pop music from the late 15 to 20 years. Its audience is usually over 30 years old, and adult contemporary listeners rank the highest by format in at work listener. The pop contemporary hit rock is a sub-format of contemporary hit rock. Its audience is focused on teenager listener with 65% of its overall listener age under 35, and their listeners also often hear the radio in the car. Classic rock. It usually plays rock singles from the 1970s and 1980s. Its audience is focused on most is men between the age of 35 and 54. The listener often listen to the radio in the car or at work. About urban contemporary, it usually plays modern hits from many break artists. Its audience is usually in the 18 to 34 age range. Mexican regional. This format devoted to Spanish language music, particularly Mexican and South American genres. In 2010, it ranked 13th in the nation and held the top spot in Los Angeles, a reflection of the rise in immigration from Mexico, Central American, and South American. The rise of Mexican regional illustrate the way in which radio can change rapidly to meet new demographic trends. There's also some other popular formats such as modern rock, alternative rock, classic hits, and urban oldies such as R&B and soul. The last one is adult hits mix older songs. Let's come to the question part. The first question. What's the answer? Yes, it's B. Yeah, it's quite easy, right? And this is my reference. Let's welcome my partner.
Dear newspaper, since its inception, radio has made an immense impact on American culture. In fact, As a new kind of mass media, radio has initially considered a kind of disembodied newspaper. Radio could reach almost everyone, even the illiterate. One could now perform an activity and listen to the radio at the same time, which made radio an instrument of social cohesion as it brought together members of the different classes and backgrounds to experience the world as a nation. Radio program reflected this nationwide culture aspect of radio. Common experience of event. Beginning in 1935, Fox Pop, a show originally based on person-in-the-street interviews, was an early attempt to quantify the United States growing mass culture by asking random people an assortment of questions. Many modern television shows still adopt this format not only for viewers' amusement and information, but also an attempt to sum up national culture. Vox Pop functioned on a cultural level as an acknowledgement of radio entrance into people's private lives to make them public. Radio news was not only a quick way to get news, but also a way for U.S. citizens to experience events with the same emotions. Radio's presence in the home also heralded the evolution of consumer culture in the United States. In 1941, 2/3 of radio programs carried advertising. Mercury Theater of the Air, War of the Worlds, and Penny Over Machine Attack. During the 1930s, radio impact and powerful social influence was perhaps most obvious in the aftermath of Orson Welles' notorious War of the Worlds broadcast. The adaptation started as if it were a normal music show that was interrupted by news reports of an alien invasion. Many listeners has turned in late and did not hear the disclaimer, and so were caught up by the realism of the adaptation. Believing to be an actual news story, individuals from every education level and walk of life had been taken in by this program. This event evolved the unquestioning faith that many Americans had in radio. Radio's intimate communication style was a powerful force during the 1930s to 1940s. Radio and music. One of the radio's most enduring legacies is its impact on music. Before radio, most pop songs were distributed through piano sheets, music, and word of mouth. This necessarily limited the types of music that could gain national prominence. Although recording technology had also emerged several decades before radio, music played live over the radio sounded better it did on a record played in the home. Live music performance thus became a staple of early radio. Many performance venues had their own radio transmitters to broadcast live shows nationwide. Radio networks many play swing jazz, giving the bands and their leaders a widespread audience. Popular lap band leaders and jazz bands became nationally famous through their radio performances, and a host of other jazz musicians flourished as radio made the genre nationally popular. National networks also played classic music, often presented in an educational context. This programming had a different tenor than the dance band programming. The promotional power of the radio also gave religion music an immense boost. Local stations often carried their own program featuring the pop music of the area. Some stations play early country, blues, and folk artists. The history of this station illustrates the ways in which radio and its wide range of broadcasting create new perspectives on American culture. Without programs that featured this country and blues artists, many famous singers would not have become national stars, and country music may not have risen to become a popular genre. In the 1940s, other southern stations also began playing rhythm and blues records recorded by black artists. During the late 1940s, both Memphis, Tennessee's WDIA and Atlanta, Georgia's WRD were owned and operated by black individuals. These disc jockeys often provided a measure of community leadership at a time when few black individuals were in powerful position. Radio technology changed the way that dance and pop song was performed. Because of the use of microphones, vocalists could be heard better over the band, allowing singers to use a greater vocal range and create more expressive styles. An innovation that led singers to become an important part of popular music image. The use of the microphone similarly allowed individual performers to be featured playing solos and lead parts, features that were less encouraged before radio. The exposure of radio also led to more rapid turnover in popular music. Before radio, jazz bands played the same arrangement for several years without it getting old. But as radio broadcasts reached wide audiences, new arrangements and songs had to be produced at a more rapid pace to keep up with changing tastes. The spotlight of radio allowed the personalities of artists to become the forefront of popular music, giving them newfound notoriety. Many musicians use radio talent shows to gain fame. Television, much like modern popular music, also seemed significant depth to the golden age of radio. Major radio networks such as NBC, ABC, and CBS became and remain major forces in television, and their programming decisions for radio formed the base of television. Actors, writers, and directors who work in radio simply transformed their talent into the world of early television, using the successes of radio as their models. Now we go to the radio and politics. Over the years, radio has had a considerable influence on the political landscape of the United States. In the past, government leaders relied on radio to convey messages to the public, such as President Franklin D. Roosevelt fireside chat. Radio was also used as a way to generate propaganda of World War II. An important contemporary conventions of radio and politics can be readily heard on modern talk radio programs. Far from being simply chat shows, the talk radio that became popular in the 1980s features a host who takes callers and discusses a wide assortment of topics. Talk radio hosts gain and keep their listeners by shows of personality, and some make shocking or insulting things to get their message across. These hosts range from conservative radio hosts, such as Rush Limbaugh, to so-called joke shows, such as Howard Stern. While talk radio first began during the 1920s, the emergence of the format as a contemporary cultural and political force took place during the mid to late 1890s, following the repeal of fairness doctrine. This doctrine, established in 1949, required any station broadcasting a political point of view over the air to allow equal time to all reasonable dissenting views. Despite its noble intentions of safeguarding public airways for diverse views, the doctrine has long attracted a level of dissent. Opponents of fairness doctrine claim that it had a chilling effect on political discourse at station rather than reach government intervention, avoided programs that were divisive or controversial. In 1986, the FCC under the Reagan administration repealed the regulation, setting the stage for an AM talk radio boom. By 2004, the number of talk radio stations has increased by 70-fold. The end of the fairness doctrine allowed stations to broadcast programs without worrying about finding an opposing point of view to balance the state opinions of its hosts. Radio hosts presenting all points of political spectrum could say anything they wanted to, without fear or fear of rebuttal. As talk radio popularity grew during the early 1990s, it quickly became an outlet for political ambitions. In 1992, 9 talk show hosts ran for U.S. Congress. By the middle of the decade, it had become common for many former or failed politicians to attempt to use the format. Former California Governor Jerry Brown and former New York Mayor Ed Coase were among the mid-1990s politicians that had AM talk shows. Both conservatives and liberals widely agreed that conservative hosts dominate AM talk radio. Many talk show hosts, such as Limbaugh, who began his popular program 1 year after the repeal of the fairness doctrine, have made a profitable business out of their programs. During the 2000s, AM talk radio continued to build. Some hosts furthered the trend of popular conservative talk shows, but liberal hosts also became popular through the show live air American Negro. The Negro closed abruptly in 2010 amid financial concerns. Although the Negro was unsuccessful, it provided a platform for some hosts. Despite their successes, liberal talk radio is often viewed as unsustainable. Tucson. The failure of Air American confirms conservatives' domination of AM radio. In response to the conservative dominance of talk radio, many prominent liberals have advocated reinstating the fairness doctrine and forcing stations to offer equal time to contrasting opinions. While the First Amendment for U.S. Constitution gives radio personalities to the freedom to say nearly anything they want to. They want on the air without fear of prosecution. It does not protect them from being fired from their jobs when their controversial comments create a public outrage. Some hosts have managed to build his career on creating controversy. Other radio hosts who have gotten themselves in trouble with poorly considered on-air comments have not been so lucky, who have ruined their career and public image. Radio's new future. Although the future of radio has been doubted many times throughout its history, it is still in existence. The inherent portability of the medium gives it an advantage over other types of media that requires an individual's full attention, such as television or print. The simplicity of radio has lent itself to a variety types of uses. In recent years, new technology have promised to expand the reach of radio and to expand the kinds of programming it offers. Satellite and HD radio has increased the amount of diversity of available programming by making more stations available. Internet radio has increased the accessibility of radio communication, and practically anyone who has access to a computer can recreate subscription podcasts to distribute around the world. These new technologies promise to make radio an enduring, innovative form of media. Satellite radio. In 1998, the FCC awarded license to two businesses interested in creating a radio version of cable television without the cables. This act was the beginning of satellite radio, and the companies soon became XM and Sirius. These two networks sold special receivers that could pick up satellite transmissions, broadcasting a wide range of formats on different channels to listeners who paid a monthly fee for the commercial-free programming. Like cable television, satellite radio was not required to censor its disc jockeys or guests for profanity. This attracted some controversial radio personalities known for their conflict with the FCC. The networks also drew hosts to create their own shows. Because listeners paid one price for access to all of the channels, these jockeys experienced less pressure to adhere to the limit playlist style of programming that was the norm for terrestrial radio station. In 2008, Sirius and XM merged to form Sirius XM. In 2010, the company recorded its first profits. HD developed around 2001 to help terrestrial radio stations compete with emerging satellite radio technology. HD radio is essentially a digital transmission of radio signals resulting in less static and their sound quality. Even for AM stations, upgraded quality is not a major benefit of HD radio. The technology allows signals to be compressed so that one station can air so-called shadow station on the same frequency as its regular broadcast. Although listeners need an HD radio to receive these channels, they pay no subscription fee, as independent stations provide their own programming as they deem necessary. HD radio allows current broadcasts to provide content they would normally put aside in favor of more commercial programs. WAMU's Bluegrass and Country Shuttle Station plays content originally played over the airwaves but relegated to the internet in favor of more marketable programs. The innovation of HD radio allowed the station to reintroduce the programs without risking its financial stability. With this financial freedom, HD radio offers a host of programming possibilities for traditional radio. Internet radio and broadcasting. Broadcasting is both a strength and limitation of broadcasting. Although technological advances of the past 50 years, such as audio recorders and microphones, have made creating a radio program simple, finding a way to broadcast the program presents difficulties for the average person. The expansion of the internet, however, have changed its limitation to a manageable hurdle for both business and individuals alike. Internet radio. At its core, Internet radio is simply the streaming of audio programs through the medium of the Internet. As early as 1994, radio stations such as Capitol Hill, West Carolina WXYZ were broadcasting their signal over the Internet, and so potentially gaining a worldwide audience. Soon, online-only radio stations were created to broadcast programs. Surveys such as Lives 365, founded in 1999, have acted as distributors for internet radio programs, charging broadcasters fees to stream their programs to a large listener audience. Another type of internet radio service is Pandora Radio. This radio website does not distribute existing programs but rather allow users to create their own custom music radio station. A listener creates a station that plays songs that are similar to the user's selection, analysis of music instrumentation to harmony, and then categorize songs according to these attributes, making it possible for listeners to customize their own station based on one or more of the catalog attributes. Despite the rise of internet radio over the past several years, its success has never been a sure thing. As the chain gained momentum, many inexperienced broadcasters confront the issue of royalties, and many experienced broadcasters encounter new legal issues related to streaming. Stations that broadcast over the airwaves must pay publishing royalties to the musicians and songwriters behind the recording, rather than pay an individual musician or songwriter each time a recording is played. However, broadcasters, including radio stations, coffee shops, and restaurants, pay for a blanket license that allows them to play any song. As internet broadcasting grew, musicians and record labels began demanding royalties from internet stations and specifying new licensing restrictions. Podcasting. Unlike internet radio, podcasting improves downloadable rather than stream programs. The term podcasting itself stems from the use of MP3 players such as Apple's iPod to use programs on demand. Many terrestrial stations have employed podcasting to supplement their traditional over-the-air broadcasting. Because these are single program rather than continuous stations, podcasts are an easier medium to produce than is national radio. Some podcast producers, such as Michael Fogarty, have created programs that lead to both deals and a steady income. Fogarty's weekly Grammar Go, Quick and Dirty Tricks podcast focuses on simple grammar rules. Within a year of its inception, this podcast racked up $1 million and received national acclaim. Nevertheless, podcasting does not fit nearly to the traditional concept of radio. Yet, there is no question that it is following the footsteps of past radio program, and that it provides a potential vision of the medium's place in years to come. Just as radio evolved from a medium for soap operas and live show to talk show and recorded music, podcasts are a window into radio may evolve into the future. Question. And next questions. Also A. The last question. D. That's all. 就直接关掉吧。开另外一个。这陌生人对这一题来说。
Okay. Just for a background, I'm not going to have any slides to refer to in the next few minutes, so I just need something to show up here. And I guess I forgot to turn the video on, so we didn't actually have the webcam on during either of these presentations, so we didn't get their pretty faces online. First, a kind of critique of the presentation. For those of you who have trouble with presenting in English, I can, like I said, I don't really grade too hard, but there obviously is going to be a difference between those who can express themselves well. That's part of the delivery, part of the score. Those who express themselves well, even if you're reading, by the way, it is possible. Like with our first presenter, even though he was reading most of it, he had more expression. And so if you're going to have to read, prepare it well. Try to make sure you can pronounce the words and so forth, and still be expressive. It's possible to do. It's most of you who are reading have a hard time expressing yourself again, as if you're speaking, as if you're just talking to somebody, because most people have a hard time and they kind of read and they read in monotone, and that gets really hard to listen to for very long before we turn off our ears a little bit. And so work on it to try to be expressive. The other thing I guess I would suggest is make sure, especially if you're going to be reading, make sure your PowerPoints are first off, very graphic, very nice looking. That's going to help us. The idea of having your script, in essence, on, I think one of the teams, had their script on the PowerPoint. That's not best practices. But if you're having trouble expressing yourself, you're having trouble even reading your script, it is possible then that we can read along with you. But it has to match exactly then. And that's still not going to that may not get you an A, but it may still be better that you have your script on the slide. Make sure it's a very readable script, very readable text. Some of the text on the last PowerPoint was hard to read. It was kind of a different typeface, quite small, even narrow line spacing. It made it hard to read it. So if you're really going to have to read, again, it's not best practices to have long sentences and stuff on your slides. I would have more slides with less text. I would still do that, even if you're going to have to read it. And try to have your text match what you're reading, so we can follow along with you. Once it doesn't match what you're reading, then we have this conflict again between what we're listening to and what we're seeing. And so in some ways, again, it may not get you all the way up to an A. Depending on your expressiveness, it might even get you up there. But anyway, obviously the first choice is to speak as naturally as possible, not to use a script, but to use PowerPoint as it's intended to be, as bullet items, short bullet items, to help remind you what you want to talk about. That's best practices. So we're kind of coming down from that. Graphic, few words on each slide. that's the preference. Again, if you are struggling with your reading, that's when maybe the fallback of actually having your script on the slide and reading exactly what people can read at the same time. Make sure the type is big enough to read from the back of the room. Make sure it's a clear typeface. That's kind of, again, not best practices, but it may be better than reading something that you're stumbling with anyway and not matching what's on the slide. I guess the other thing is also, if you're struggling, make it shorter. Just make it shorter. I don't expect you to cover absolutely everything in the textbook anyway. I'm expecting you to choose the most interesting stuff out of the textbook. And so you actually may score more points by saying less if you're struggling with it. So don't worry about it. Go ahead and cut it down, speak a little bit less, and get through the material. And it's okay. It's okay. It's not going to hurt you. Nobody's going to drop a whole lot from this activity. I would say, no matter how bad you do, I can't imagine anybody losing more than 3% of their overall grade on this activity. So in other words, if the maximum is 100%, just knock you down to 97. That's the worst anybody in here could possibly do, and nobody's gotten that bad yet. So nobody's actually gotten that low yet. But that's because I don't grade that hard. So relax a little bit. Make sure you do. I'm grading the PowerPoint. I'm grading the content. I'm grading the delivery. Those are all important. I'm also grading the timing and so forth. And timing, again, if you're reading too much and you're not very expressive, you're monotone, I'd rather it be shorter. So if you're really struggling with it, make it shorter. Don't worry about it. And we go on. We all survive this. Okay, so some comments about the content, and more importantly, we kind of start from the beginning here. One of the interesting aspects, they did mention it, the soap operas, what's called the soap operas. I think I may have already explained why they called it soap operas. And that's because one of the innovators of that time was Procter & Gamble. Some of you probably use their products here. They're still one of the big companies of soap products and other, facial products and whatever. So Procter & Gamble, P&G, they really grew during the Great Depression. There were some companies during the Great Depression. Well, let me kind of put these in terms of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett says that when, I'm not getting the words exactly right, but when everyone else is afraid, that's when to be aggressive. When everybody else is aggressive, that's when to draw back. And those aren't exactly his words. But that's the demonstration of that in the 1930s. A few companies totally changed the economic status in America by being aggressive. One of those was P&G, was Procter & Gamble, by sponsoring so many of these soap operas. They grabbed that opportunity, and their share of the market zoomed during the 1930s, the Great Depression, when everybody else was being cautious. Oh, we need to save money because we're in this Great Depression. Procter & Gamble didn't do that. They went in and invested in advertising, and they created all these serial dramas on the radio, aimed particularly at the women. Again, they mentioned as daytime serials. So when the men were typically off working and the women were working at home, they'd turn on the radio and listen to these soap operas. And again, let that company grab a big share of that market. Another company that did the same thing was Chevrolet or General Motors. Going into the Great Depression, the big innovator in cars was Henry Ford. Of course, the founder of the Ford company. But Ford became cautious during the 1930s. And so, General Motors or Chevrolet became the innovators. And they kept introducing new styles of cars and so forth. And they advertised more. And they became the dominant car manufacturer in the 1930s. So when everybody else got cautious, certain companies decided this is our opportunity. And that's shown true through the ages, at least the modern ages of advertising, that, like I said, during a recession or during a depression, some of the biggest success stories have occurred because they were not cautious. Everybody else became cautious, and they were not cautious, and were able to dominate their field. So that's an interesting part, I think, kind of a sidelight to this golden era of radio in the 1930s into the 1950s. Also had a marketing side to it. As I mentioned before, especially, in fact, if you go back to the inventions we're talking about, notice even if they were invented someplace else, even if it was Marconi inventing it, where did it really happen? It happened in America, because America had the freest economy. And so that was where somebody could become rich by implementing technology. So sometimes it's not who invents something, it's who implements something. How do you figure out how to make money off this thing? And so the people trying to figure out how to make money off this stuff were at that time in America, which was by far the freest economy in the world. And so you saw a lot of that stuff through that era was happening in America, not someplace else, because they had economic incentive to do that. That was ultimately the failure of the Soviet Union, was they had no, in fact, maybe I shouldn't say this, but let me put it this way. Somebody very close to me who grew up during the Soviet years, has told me enough about her father that I know that I think I can extrapolate a little bit that one of the main innovations during the Soviet Union was how to rip off the government, how to figure out how to get an edge, because the government was basically enslaving your work. And so they'd figure out, okay, how can I steal from the government? How can I get something extra from the government? And figure out, how to, because they were innovators. Basically, that was the only realm that they could innovate. There was, in a broader sense, there were statistics that the homegrown gardens, the gardens around people's houses, were outproducing the state farms during the Soviet Union period. Again, why? Well, because they benefited from it. People respond to incentives. And so, that's the kind of the miracle of the modern China, is that they somehow blended a free market with a communist government. And it's obviously paying great dividends for them and becoming one of the most powerful economies in the world. So free market it provides the incentive. Maybe, Poe talks about, you kind of have the tinkerers, people kind of tinker with stuff. Well, Marconi may have been the tinkerer, the guy who invented radio, but he didn't get anything from it. People who then take an invention and figure out, okay, how can we make money off this thing? They're almost always going to be in a free market, because that's where those are the people who can make money off the thing. And so that's why most of the world now have recognized that. And so even in the former or current communist countries, they have introduced free market to stimulate innovation, because that's the only way they're going to get it. People are going to look after themselves. That's whether it's figuring out how to rip off the government or innovating some other way, they're going to figure out how to help themselves. It's talking about, first off the FRC turning into the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. There's some interesting aspects of that. The team did talk about talk radio, but having lived through that era myself, let me explain that talk radio was almost all conservative talk radio. In other words, the Trump, Reagan side of politics in America took over talk radio during that period of time after the what's called the Fairness Doctrine was eliminated. Now, in the early years, they didn't use frequencies very well, so it took a more bandwidth in order to broadcast a radio signal. Plus, radio was the only audio-visual medium available at that time. So there weren't very many frequencies. There was only one, and so the government said, okay, the First Amendment says we can't control communication, but there's only so many frequencies, so not everybody can have a radio station. So if not everybody can have a radio station, then we, the government, have to claim ownership of the airwaves, and we have to somehow regulate it and decide who gets to use the radio. So it was somewhat contrary to the First Amendment of the American Constitution to have any regulation, but it was the technical nature at that time that required it. There wasn't much choice. They didn't fully explain. The team didn't fully explain, but basically, before the FRC was passed, you had people, all sorts of people did start their radio stations. But the problem is you'd have a person from one town starting a radio station, another person from another town using the same frequency, and all this area in between had both stations interfering with each other. So the people in between couldn't hear either one of them. So it was just chaos when you had radio stations overlapping with each other. So that wasn't working. That was just making people upset. So that had to be eliminated. Again, once you stepped in and said, okay, we have to stop the interference of stations, again, it was a matter of regulating, in essence, regulating people in violation of the First Amendment, but they didn't see a way around it. Well, so that held true, and they kept that regulation, including regulations like the Fairness Doctrine that said, if you're going to talk about the liberal perspective, you've got to let somebody come and talk about the conservative perspective, or vice versa. And as was mentioned, what that really did was stop all political discussion on radio and TV. Because it was too hard to do this. It was too hard. They didn't want to get in trouble with the FCC, and so both on radio and TV, they just did not talk about politics. They would do news, and they try to have fairly fair coverage on news, conservative and liberal and so forth, and people in between. But other than that, they did not want to get into it because it just was too hard, and it ultimately also became uninteresting to the listeners even, just to try to, it became so, how do I say, it wasn't very powerful. It wasn't very interesting to start with. But when you start, being cautious about what you do, people were afraid to say anything controversial, and so forth. So it wasn't working. But then by 1989, and before that actually, of course, first off, technology allowed for more radio stations. In fact, some of the signals, some of the frequencies weren't even being used on radio. It cost so much to get into radio at that point to do quality radio that the average person isn't going to start a radio station. In the early years, the technology was fairly cheap, and people could start a radio station. It wasn't great, but it was something, because none of them were great. The technology was low, and so lots of people could get into radio, and that's when they were interfering with each other. But then as it progressed, to really have quality radio, you had to spend a lot of money. And people weren't going to spend $1 million to start their own radio station, even if they could. And so, as I said, there's frequencies not being used now. Then, of course, TV came into it, and you had all the TV potential the opportunities to express yourself, and cable, then increase that to hundreds of stations. So all of it came down, and then on top of that, of course, the print media, and then the emerging internet. And so the Republicans under Reagan said, hey, we don't need the Fairness Doctrine anymore. It doesn't make any sense. We're stifling political discussion, not helping it. And we have enough different media that we don't need it. Everybody's going to get to hear what they want to hear. And so that was done away with. But then an interesting thing happened. And that's what I was just saying, is that the conservatives took over radio talk. Why did that happen? Well, that's more to the uses and gratifications, their theory of communications. And over the years, conservatives had become aware that there was a liberal bias in the news reporting and discussion on TV and radio. So even though supposedly they're being fair and objective, they really weren't. And the conservative population of America knew that. They were being, there was a slant to the news. And so the conservative talk shows became very popular as a way of hearing a different side to the story. It wasn't exactly news, but as a conservative discussion. So they still kind of depended on the liberal press to give them the news, and then the conservative analysts would say, okay, but they didn't tell you this, and they didn't tell you that, and this is how you should try to interpret it. And so the conservative talk show took off. There were some people who tried to start liberal talk shows, but because the media was controlled by liberals, just economically, they just didn't make it. There were very, very few liberal talk shows that were economically successful because no liberals bothered to listen to them. I mean, it depended. You made money off of your audience, and there was no liberal audience. They already felt like, my interpretation of the situation is they felt like they got plenty of the talk that they wanted to hear from regular TV because it already had a liberal slant to it. And so during that period of time, then as of when they stopped enforcing the fairness doctrine, like I said, the conservative talk show just took off. Liberal talk show never hardly existed. That has actually led to some of the liberals trying to reinstitute the fairness doctrine, not because it's necessary, but because they don't like the conservatives owning that part. The liberals control the TV, liberals control Hollywood, liberals control the newspapers. They don't want conservatives only controlling anything. So it's really a political thing that they have talked about reinstituting the fairness doctrine just to get all those dang conservatives off the radio. It's a hotbed of conservatism. But it also was probably the inspiration for starting Fox TV. Fox is the only somewhat conservative TV network in America. And I think they saw the success. I mean, there were people like Rush Limbaugh and people like that in talk radio that were becoming millionaires off of radio, running their running their radio shows and syndicating their radio shows across America. So they thought, hey, if Rush Limbaugh can make millions off of his little talk show, what could we do with a more conservative, TV channel? And so, again, it was a matter of finding the unserved audience. That's as we start talking a little more about Clayton Christensen, about how a new company can overcome an established monopoly. That was Fox in the start of the 1990s when they started. They were big underdogs. Nobody thought they could compete against the big networks. And they went slowly, they built slowly, but they built it off of the idea that there is a big share of the audience here that's not being catered to. That they, again, just like talk radio had shown that the conservative population did not like what they were hearing in the other media, and so Fox Radio came in and tapped into what Clayton Christensen calls the non-consumer, the consumer who does not have an option. And so the conservative consumers did not have a TV option that they liked. Fox came in and filled that gap, and has become very big success. So that has also been an interesting turn, and of course now in retrospect, with the emergence of the internet and all the internet programming, there's even less excuse to control the content of radio, TV, or anything. We lack any control over the web. In fact, this idea of putting TV on Facebook is one of the ideas I've been playing with to talk to the American media, particularly the local media, about, is to start a competitor to Facebook with TV programming. So I was mad to see that they've already come up with the idea, although still the best way to do it. I think it was a natural progression for Facebook to realize that they could put TV programming on Facebook and make it successful. And so could a competitor. And so I still think that's a viable idea. But that is going to hurt the local stations, the local media that have been covering the news, whether they're liberal, conservative. On a local basis, it's usually not that significant. Local news is not always, doesn't mirror national news. It's hard to read who's a liberal or conservative when you're talking about local politics. Frankly, in fact, probably most local politicians pretend to be conservative, even if they're not. Because the average person in a local town is fairly conservative. They're looking after their pocketbook. And their local issues of local taxes becomes more important to them. They're more involved in local government and stuff. And so it is concerning to me that that these new ideas, the idea of moving everything to the internet, is going to eliminate the local news coverage to a large degree. So actually, my idea is to get more of them to work together and create a anti-Facebook that is controlled by local media and will benefit local media and help them survive possibly, because they haven't figured out how to do it on their own yet. Okay, we're about out of time. We probably are out of time. Let's see if there's anything else that I really think is important. When it talks about the monopolies and also the conglomerates started taking over radio, again, I'm not too concerned about that because I think radio's going to disappear anyway. Some of these things where they start, again, the liberal professors who are writing the textbooks are still all uptight about the monopolies and the conglomerates controlling the mainstream media. But what's happening on the internet is going to kill them anyway. So I don't know that that's particularly. In fact, radio may last longer because of the conglomerates than it will otherwise. If it weren't for the conglomerates, local radio would probably disappear sooner. So if the conglomerates can be strong enough and figure out some ways to fight the competition from the internet, they might survive. Otherwise, they're just going to die anyway. They're not going to be able to compete with what's happening with the internet, and the internet is going to become more localized. I mean, I guess this is part of it that you don't maybe understand, that maybe I need to explain, is that Facebook allows local advertising. I can go on Facebook, and if I want to advertise in my hometown, I can tell it only show Facebook users in my local area, 50-mile radius, perhaps, around my house in America. And those are the only people who see my advertising. So Facebook is not just a global medium. It's a local medium also. It has local users and local advertisers. And so that's why the online media will kill the local media, is that they are also a local medium. Again, my best advertising would be to go to Facebook and just have them show just the people around my area, if I had a local business, my ads. And then it's a pay-per-click. So it doesn't cost me very much. It might cost me 30 cents per click to have somebody click on my little ad on Facebook. Only local people will see it. They click on it, and that takes them to my website. My website can have everything I want to. It can have an entire inventory. If I was a grocery store, it can have my entire inventory on that website. And so the Facebook is not just competing with the networks. It's competing with the local TV station, the local newspaper, and a lot of local businesses don't understand that yet, so they aren't taking full advantage of it. But as Facebook becomes more and more powerful, they will start reaching down in the communities and letting the local business people understand, hey, we're your best buy. And they're going to take even more advertising from the local newspapers and more advertising from the local radio station, the local TV stations, because that's the way that they're built to do that. Their advertising is allowed to be very demographic specific, very geographic specific, even to some degree psychographic specific. They can be extremely specific on the people who see your ad. And you only pay, if you choose pay per click, you only pay for those that actually then click on your ad and come to your website. So it's almost crazy for an advertiser not to advertise with Google and with Facebook, those that allow that selection of geographic, demographic specifics, and only pay per click. It makes sense. And that's the sort of thing that will destroy the local media, is the advertising, unless they figure out a way to counter that. And that's, so far, they haven't come anywhere close to figuring out a way to counter that. And they're dying as a result. Well, there may be some other things to talk about, but we're out of time. So next week we'll be going to the visual side of it, and we will have a presentation on movies and then on TV. It's kind of, movies, the sequence is kind of debatable. Maybe radio should have led into TV and movies should have gone before that, and but that's whatever. We get the idea. They're going from audio, and now they're going to the visual media. So we have movies and TV together, and so we'll talk some more about that. Okay, I'll be here if anybody needs to come talk to me. Talk to you later. Bye.